Welcome to another conversation from Peaks Island Radio. I'm Chris. Today I'm pleased to be joined by Evie Ladin, a world-class banjo player and musician. Evie's coming to Peaks on March 29th as part of the Long Winter's Night concert series at New Brackett Church. That'll take place at 7 p.m. In this interview, we'll talk about Evie's roots in music and movement and what folks can expect to hear at her performance. But first, I also want to update you on the results of the Spring Hop. If you went to the Hop, or if you listened to the last interview with Danielle and Sage, you know they were raising funds for a community art event. Well, the Hop brought in approximately $750, enough to host an invitational group show at the Crow's Nest and Gathering Space. There are already 12 confirmed artists for the group show. It's going to run Friday, May 24th, starting with a reception that evening, and it's going to be available weekends through Sunday, June 2nd, and that includes Memorial Day hours on May 27th. Congratulations to Danielle and Sage, and thank you to everyone who participated in that fun night of dance. Hopefully there'll be other dances to look forward to in the future. Hopefully we'll continue to fund the arts out here on Peaks Island. Now, here's Evie Ladin. And so if you could tell me a little bit about your background, what got you started in music, and I think maybe what sort of lit your passion for the type of music they perform.
I mean, it really came from my family. I joke that I grew up in the hills of New York City, always in cities between New York and Baltimore. But my mom was an international folk dance teacher when that was all the rage in the 60s and 70s. She led a lot of groups in New York City. And I mostly was raised by my dad, and my dad fell in love with folk music, but specifically Southern Appalachian string band music when he went to a hootenanny at Carnegie Hall in 1958. And so he famously went and threw all of his original rock and roll records down the incinerator and just became a huge folk music fan. And then he also opened our house to musicians and cloggers and dancers traveling through when we lived in New Jersey and in Baltimore and wherever he lives, and now wherever my sister and I live. Just really a part of the wider folk community of people who are making music by people for people and engaging people in dance and participation and all of that kind of stuff. I never, I've skirted with the industry and all of that, but somehow my career has, because I don't know whether it's because of where I landed generationally or because of the mix of music and dance, like it's never just been one focus. It's always been this combination of music and dance, that dance is music and music is dance. You know, growing up doing percussive dance, clogging, and other kinds of social dance. It's just what people do. And so I didn't know it would be my career. I'm grateful that it has become my career, but I really grew up really enmeshed in a social scene of music and dance, being that connective tissue that all human cultures generally have had throughout time.
So I did not have the experience of having people sort of come through the house who were artists and performers. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that's like. Maybe it felt like it was just sort of normal, or maybe you had an understanding of like how special and unique that was.
I mean, it was definitely different from what my peers at school were experiencing. I remember my dad saying, you know, just a few years ago, I was always glad that you girls would come with me. And I said, I don't remember having a choice. It was just what we did. You know, into my teenage years, I might not have been as excited about having all these random strangers staying in our house. But years later, you know, you don't let teenagers make decisions for you because years later, of course, I'm grateful every time I come across people who say, I stayed at your house once, you know. But in high school, I was like, Dad, get the cloggers off the porch. Could you please? But also just, you know, being in that environment, um, it's such a gratifying environment to be around people engaging in the practice, not just as a consumer, you know, but engaging the practice of music and dance. My sister and I loved dancing. That was my first love, and specifically like percussive dance, like clogging and other kinds of step dance forms. And then I played music for fun. We had banjo lessons from the time I was 8 years old. And, you know, it was just what we did. I honestly don't remember having opinions about it very much. Um, and of course, years later, just being extremely grateful that, you know, someone asked after a concert, what was your aha moment about, becoming a musician. And I thought about it and I realized I didn't really have an aha moment because it was all around me all the time. And at some point, in developing my career in my 20s, it took me to my late 20s to realize, oh, I'm doing it. Like I'm doing what it was I thought, what am I supposed to be doing with my life?
That's neat. So you said you started banjo lessons at 8. Did you sort of consciously choose that as the instrument that you wanted to take lessons in, or did you dabble with other things too?
John Cohen, who played with the New Lost City Ramblers, famously one of the, most professional Yankee groups that went down south and photographed and studied and celebrated and brought Southern musicians around to tour. He was staying with us and sitting on our couch, and he said, "You girls should play banjo." And my dad found a young man living nearby in Princeton, New Jersey, who was living with his parents named Bob Carlin, who's become a very well-known banjo player. Um, but he was probably, 10, 15 years older than me, and he gave my sister and I banjo lessons. I was 8 years old. It was just like, okay, now this is what we're doing. And it was fun. It was fine. I don't know. I don't remember having many feelings or opinions about any of it.
That's so funny. And when do you think you started to have sort of feelings or opinions about how this is something that you wanted to be part of your life? I know you said it sort of took you till your, mid to late 20s to realize like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. But when did it start to feel like something that you always wanted to make sure you had as part of your life?
I mean, engaging in music and dance practice is the most thoroughly human thing. And uh, when I was a teenager, Stefan Senders, who lives outside of Ithaca, New York, had done ethnomusicology research in Ghana, and he came to a Ashokan Fiddle and Dance camp, where again, being Gen X, my sister and I were like the only kids there practically. And when I was 16, he taught us these West African rhythms, and this light bulb went off, not even about the greater connectivity to the Appalachian music and dance culture so far, but just it really spoke to me, these polyrhythms, and it took me years to realize that, I basically took that information and did a deep dive into the African studies and the African side of, well, it wasn't even connecting it with Appalachian music and dance at first. I went to Brown University and I created an independent major of everything I could study about African culture. And my thesis, was, studying where music and dance is a part of social communication, which is, of course, every culture, but as a teenager, I didn't know this. It wasn't a part of, popular culture growing up in inner city Baltimore. It wasn't something that my friends did or that I did in school. I didn't do music and dance in school. I was mostly an athlete. I feel like it was through the process of doing, like studying it and having those young epiphanies that you realize, duh, of course, much later on. And then am grateful that the experience of, sort of reconnecting the African diaspora culture and polyrhythms and tonal systems and all of that with the Appalachian music and dance that I grew up with became really foundational for me. And so I felt like I was just following my interests, and following the things that turned me on, and like rhythm and rhythmic dance and moving my body, and especially as an athlete and all of that. It just, it really engaged me. And then with my family, we were always going to music festivals where, especially as a young person, there's so much freedom there and everybody is participating in this thing. And it's a glorious thing, even if you're just hanging out and listening, just like culturally, it's the most exceptional place to be. And you expose kids to music and dance early on, whether or not they continue down that path, which I feel like not everyone needs to continue down that path, but just having the access to it, doing something for fun. It doesn't have to be a professional endeavor. And it's funny, it's even as much as that folk world exposed, like those hippies who were the boomers, who then had kids, who grew up in those environments or went to fiddle camp, a lot of those people have become professionals or trying to become professionals when in part the goal is really to do it, to have the experience of doing it rather than necessarily making your living from it. Um, because then you're commodifying something that is, again, the most basic human activity. So even as much as I do it, I've realized that a huge part of my career is encouraging people to participate, to engage in the active experience of playing music and dancing. And it's really gratifying because people are so grateful to have that opened up to them because they don't feel like they have access. And not to turn the tables, but like you said, you didn't grow up with that kind of experience, and here, you're on the radio, so something drew you into that, in as much of a participatory aspect as radio is, which it is. It's like, really important. And I've been a radio DJ, community radio years ago, and loved that, curative aspect of it.
Yeah, very, very much so. Right. Being able to sort of find, and one of the things that appeals to me about what you're saying is like when you sort of find or feel or sense a connection right between, maybe African music and Appalachian music, and then being able to share that with people, right? And it's almost like evangelizing our humanity in some way, right? And like, hey, look, like, listen to how this sounds together. And I wonder, one of the things I was going to ask you before you had made that comment about radio is sort of how, after that sort of light bulb moment for you, how you've sort of carried that forward, both maybe in your professional life, but then also just in your day-to-day life. How do you carry forward that sort of illumination that you've got about the importance of music and making those connections?
I feel like, well, I'm always prioritizing the experience of playing music and dancing with other people and facilitating that experience, not only for people, but also for myself, like with myself. I call square dances. I help organize community events. I just I just reinstigated something I've called a old time shred sesh because there are the most public sessions are generally more slow sessions, often more oriented towards fiddle players. And part of the thing about old time music that I grew up with is about the groove, and the rhythm of it. Rhythm has become, foundational. Well, it is foundational, but it's foundational in a lot of what I do. And the shred sesh is about having an onion jam where you have a core group and layers around it so that it really holds the rhythm tight. And it also gives like more intermediate players that feeling, that like really deep connective feeling of the getting on the train. So I've organized this session and I can't hardly ever go because because I'm working when it's happening. But people kept asking me, are you going to start it shut down with the pandemic, and people are saying, are you going to start it again? Are you going to start it again? And we do it at our local Irish pub, which also, has a variety of music and dance events that are participatory sessions and even Balkan music and dance where you can join in the circle. And that kind of brought me full circle to the kind of things that my mom was teaching, was like more Eastern European dances where you join in the circle. And of course, like as I've gotten older and especially as I've gotten feedback from, students and communities and stuff, everyone's like, oh, they're surprised at how good it feels to get out of your head. And even in college, I was like, these parties where people are just drinking and talking are boring. Like, yeah, we're talk, 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 talk. But when you engage in a music or dance experience with people, you're connecting, there's an entrainment, you're connecting rhythmically, you're connecting in this whole other part of your brain that is really stimulating. And it's just a dopamine factory. And so I'm always seeking that out. I get together with people just to play music for no reason, not just rehearsing, just to play tunes, just to enjoy doing it. I'll even play fiddle, and I don't think of myself as a fiddler, but I love to play the fiddle. It's not a professional aspiration, but it's something I really enjoy. I don't know if that answers your question, but
It does, yeah, yeah. That's so neat to hear that. Despite being a professional musician, that you do sort of like to sample other instruments. And I wonder if you could talk about, um, I guess, kind of especially since we're talking about getting out of your head, sort of the feeling of being able to pick up something that's maybe um, new to you or novel compared to the maybe more concentrated practice with the instruments that you're using for your performances.
yeah, I mean, my one of my bandmates, Eric Pearson, he was just saying, I mean, I'm terrible with practice because I didn't grow up in any sort of environment where regular practice was a thing. It was more like the experience of doing it, and we kept experiencing it. So I kept doing it. But he was saying, every time you practice something new, you're carving new neural pathways in your brain, and that's very stimulating. And so I do notice, if when I get myself to sit down and practice just on my own, you just feel better. And even, you know, so many people are sort of have the experience of being forced to play an instrument that they're not enjoying. And very often it comes with like a rigorous, structured kind of teaching that isn't social and it isn't about the enjoyment of playing music. Like I don't even read music. I know the concept, but haven't had to apply it in so much of what I do that I've never become fluent. Let's put it that way, in reading music. And whereas I've met people who are like, I can't play anything unless I see it, you know, and there's a big dichotomy between those kinds of experiences. And I don't, great. Some people can read music and play the music on the page and enjoy that. But you get a lot of people just, just like, they teach square dancing in elementary school and often try to make it a rigid, like boy girl thing right at the moment when boys and girls have no desire to be near each other or especially touch each other. So it sets itself up for failure. And I feel like sometimes the way that music can be taught, when it's taught really strictly, it separates the joy of music from the experience of learning it. So I know that there are other methodologies, especially like Orff music pedagogy, that we interact a lot, and it's more about engaging music and dance and culture in the practice of music and finding the ways in which it is satisfying. So, I teach a lot of adults, and people have a lot of uh, blockages that about music, and I think of this triangle between the knowledge patterning and your physical patterning and your ear. And in an oral tradition, it's all about developing your ear. And a lot of people who learn from the page don't have a hard time making that transition. So I keep kind of circling around these modalities and being like, you have access to this. And if you can play in time, you can play in a jam session. If you're in tune and in time, you can join in playing with other people. Time is non-negotiable though. Rhythm is non-negotiable. And that was kind of my whole thing about the shred sesh was that like, a lot of great musicians when they play in music sessions, they play behind closed doors. And I wanted the more advanced players to have the experience of joining in something that just like, when you're dancing or playing in time with people, it's that all the research, so much research has been done. Let's do another study about how music makes you feel good. And even like, when my kid was in school, we'd put up a timer and say, You don't have to be a musician. This is for your brain. This is the development of your brain is learning music. And the music education as a school was less than desired. And so, we got him lessons. He never chose an instrument. He cycled around to this and that. We're just like, but you have to play something. You have to be playing or dancing in some capacity. And he never settled on anything until he was in his late teens. And now he is pursuing a music career more in like hip hop and R&B as a producer and has his own route through it. And I think it's also just as it was shown to me as like, this is what our family does for fun. We get together with people and play music, and we do it as a profession because it is fun. And I feel like, when I'm coming to Peaks Island, which I'm very excited about, I'm doing a concert. I'm not doing, a participatory workshop or anything like that, which I often do link with concerts. But my concert, I also feel like I bridge that, what they call the fourth wall of just like engaging with people in a way that makes them feel included and like we're all going on this emotional journey together. And it's pulling in things from trad music and dance and from contemporary life and songwriting. The idea of mixing music and dance, of having rhythm be foundational, and we're all connecting in that space. And I heard a great interview once that I won't go on and on about, but it was about a flight attendant who is also a comedian and talking about, as a flight attendant, you're trying to get a group of people feel like individuals, like individually comfortable in their spaces. But as a comedian or as a performer, you're trying to get a group of individuals to feel like a group and to have this group experience that they're moving through together. And it makes people feel connected, even if you are just in the audience.
Speaking of coming out to Peaks Island, I know for a fact because, in fact, the last interview that I did with somebody who actually does specialize in working with folks on movement, that there are people on the island for whatever reason, whether it's because New Englanders tend to be a little bit cold and reserved, or if it was something in these particular people's pasts, that there are sometimes like really strong desires to engage with music, engage with dance, and then kind of like you alluded to before, a block, and it makes it difficult. And I know that there's some people who might be listening to this interview who are anxious about being able to, feel that and participate that, even right down to with their kids. The interview that I had done before was about how somebody had said that they really just wanted to be able to move with their kids and feel that joy with their kids. Do you have any thoughts on that and any suggestions for folks who maybe want to try out being able to make that connection or feel that bridge at your show?
I mean, at my show, kids are welcome. And we, through percussive dance, and just as my career trajectory has gone into the realm of body music, that my partner is really well known for, and he's trained as a jazz drummer. Keith Terry, he put all the music on his body and also had this music and dance continuum. That was part of where we connected. But, body music is the oldest music on the planet. It's like before instruments, people are clapping and stepping and singing and doing all the things that the body does to make music and express themselves. And kids relate to that like nobody's business. They don't shy away from it. It doesn't need to be codified. It doesn't need to be goal oriented. The whole goal is just to do it. And just being in environments like, like music together is one of, a more widespread thing about a more widespread program for playing music with like infants. And like a friend of mine started teaching guitar classes to the parents, and there was this hunger for the parents to be able to play the music that they're learning in there so they can do it at other times. And the main thing is just, I can't tell you, I call a lot of square dances, and some are community dances and some are private dances. And I didn't realize that would become such a huge part of, or a side hustle or whatever. And every time I call a square dance, people are like, some people will come and be like, we don't know what we're doing. And I'm like, I know. Like you assume that nobody knows what they're doing. And there's this easy access entry point. And over again, and even with college students, everybody, people have an idea of what it is. And then, especially if you have a good caller who's more about inclusion than like perfection, than like getting it right, then, people engage in it. And even when they're getting it wrong, they're laughing, they're dancing with their friends. And one college student recently was like, I feel giddy. It's like I had no idea that it was possible. And it's different from like, just regular dancing at a club or to music where you're just moving. You have a little bit of instruction and you're moving through space and you're engaging with other people. And even recently, a dance caller was calling here, and there was like a birthday party that came to the dance, and he said, "I could tell the people who were not used to touching other people. Like you see, like I'll take hands and circle to the left, and they were like, take hands? Like I'm gonna touch you?" And yet you just like go for it, and it makes you feel like a kid again. And you just kind of have to get into those spaces where it's not, just about a class environment or a rigorous environment, but more open and more social. And, it's just really surprising about how freeing that is.
It's so easy to fall into the idea of like needing that sort of more rigid environment or like the class environment that you talked about. And I think,
And it's a, sorry to interrupt you, but just like I think about this as a very Western way of learning, very linear, that you have to learn it before you do it. Whereas in traditional culture, in traditional human culture, it's usually a lot more circular. Like whether it's circle dances or even the music, like a lot of traditional music is a very short cycle that goes around and around and around, and you just got to get on the train and you pick up things as you go. And the idea is about circular learning. And if you go to any other traditional culture where there's engaging in music and dance, you will see children in the mix. And the whole idea is you are a part of this from the
mhm,
time you're born.
that's so neat. So connect the dots for me back to African music and Appalachian music. Do you see that parallel there too, where it's more circular rather than linear? Like, is there a difference even within our Western music society?
Oh yeah, I mean, I can't speak about African music. Africa's an enormous continent, with with thousands of cultural traditions. But, in the Southern Appalachian Mountains, this is the first syncretic American music of, you had Scotch Irish, Northern Europeans, not all who were rich, some were indentured servants, a lot of laborers and things like that. And of course, you had Africans who were enslaved. And then you had native peoples that were already there. And they're all influencing each other. The banjo met the fiddle, the the English language met this tonal system from Africa, this like, pentatonic scale, and um, these things just mixed to create something new, and they were all influencing each other. And it's been such a pivotal thing in my whole career, like throughout from academia into my professional career. And now it's becoming, I mean, only in the last like 5 years or so has become much more commonly known that the banjo is an African instrument, that, of course, having Rhiannon Giddens play banjo on Beyonce's new song that dropped, Texas Hold'em, everyone's like, black people have always been a part of country music. And it's like, yes, Rhiannon and I were, talking over social media of like, okay, finally everyone's catching on to this idea. And, in both of these, in all of those cultures, music and dance was in every human culture. And capitalism kind of got in the way of that, of like monetizing, that you don't do activities if they're not monetary, or whatever, that high culture, that you have to be trained in order to do something. But square dancing came from, aristocratic quadrilles that people, had to learn in high society. But then when it came over to America, the role of the dance caller came from the African community, of because they needed someone to tell them what to do because they hadn't learned it, in their castle or whatever. So this real mix up of things. So um yeah, I mean the African influence is deep in American music from the get-go, and from our own traditional music, old time, and then bluegrass, country, blues, jazz, swing, hip hop, you name it, comes from that intersection of cultures, And as we know, a lot of the best art comes from adversity, comes from like the hardest possible situations to live in.
That's the truth. And thank you for clarifying. That is, in fact, what I was looking for, the sort of African influence on Western culture, not trying to suggest that there was one type of African music, but you really nailed it with your response. I appreciate that. In closing, or beginning to close out the conversation, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how these themes are going to surface in your concert here on Peaks. We talked a little bit about the fact that it's going to be a concert rather than sort of instructive, but how when people show up, how are they going to sort of feel or experience the things that we've been talking about in your show?
Well, I always do some dancing in my show and do some body music. I do a mix of old songs and new songs. I've got songs that make people laugh and make people cry, and I love taking people through that emotional roller coaster, and just things that people can identify with that are just very human. And it's interesting because, I have lived in California for a long time. I'm not from California, and that's been a huge transition from east to west. And it's always interesting coming back, and especially to New England, to maybe a more reserved culture in a way. And yet New England, the music that's settled in New England, more Celtic oriented, is some of the rowdiest, foot stomping, very engaged kind of music and dance traditions as well. And so I feel like just like on a very human level, I'm not one of those navel gazing singer songwriters that's all, singing about me, or, that I tell a story and then I sing the same story I just told you. I really love in songwriting the play of language. I was a big reader growing up, and I love writing, and just kind of tapping into some base things about the human experience that people can identify with, and mixing it up. So I love being in different spaces. I love the architecture. The fact that people are on an island is always really fascinating. And the folks that invited me, I met at the Acadia Trad Camp up in Maine, and I had never been there, but the experience is the same, is let's all get together and play music and dance. And it's that vibe that I bring to even just my, performance concerts.
Well, it's fantastic. We're very much looking forward to having you up.
Thanks so much. Thanks for doing this interview. I hope we have a full house and a great time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same here. I'm hoping so too. Any final thoughts or anything that I didn't ask that you want folks to know?
Well, this is part of a larger tour. And so I do have some dates, like in Albany, New York, and Burlington and Cambridge. And so, if it's something you enjoy, thanks for spreading the word to the larger area. And I also have a real range of videos out there because I do also have a percussive dance group. And, I engage in the trad scene and the songwriter scene, and, just kind of spread my wings wherever it may impact people, young and old. So I look forward to tapping into the community where you are. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks so much. Yeah. And I'll put a link in the show notes too for folks who want to, go and look it up. But for folks that maybe are just going to be listening, do you mind saying like where folks can find you? Where's like the hub for folks to find you?
Yeah. Evie Ladin, Ladin. A lot of people spell my last name wrong, but I'm the only Evie Ladin on the internet. So on my socials or .com or any of those things, you can find me online, and you can find a YouTube channel and all of the things that we do. Evie Ladin.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening in on this island conversation. If you want to hear more stories like this, please check out peaksoundradio.com, where we have all of our interviews and stories archived. You can also follow us on Instagram and in your favorite podcast app.